In a world where Liberia and her youngest sister, Valicia, never fought, a great many things were different. She was never led away from his family as a child, and thus was able to grow up in a happy family, where Ryuzaki learned how to treat him kinder, where his father was able to teach him how to work in the kitchens and continue his family business, and his mother couldn't be prouder of all three of them. In a healthier version of the Sunlight Church, where its goddess wasn't preoccupied with trying to outshine her sister, Palin was able to get the support and resources that he needed to remain loyal to his paladin oaths and live an honourable life. With more reliable access to advanced healers, Dane's little brother Deegan never killed his mother during the birth, and thus Dane never ran away from home and visited Wollen. Instead, he lived a better life with his little brother, with both of them distancing themselves from their royal family in adulthood. Deegan became an expert at creating schematics, and Dane learned how to forge them. With reliable life insurance policies from the Sunlight Church, meaning you could pay the church to literally cast a resurrection spell on you once a year in case you died somewhere during the middle of it, Tywin did get brought back after all, and was able to be a part of Nadar's life back on the Isle of Dragons. Eventually, when it was time for Nadar to leave the nest, he didn't travel to Wollen, but rather it was his father that brought him along to explore all the pleasures of the world, even if Nadar spent most of that time apologizing on his father's behalf. Even in the happiest timeline, Carrick and Eva's marriage couldn't be saved, but Carrick still enjoyed his training under Vulcan at the monastery in Lostwick. Golkak and Ickle both continued to improve at their craft back at Bristol, and became a master smith and an expert mage, respectively. Little Squilliam, who was never renamed Squilliam in this timeline, remained as Little Itachi, as he grew up in a happy family that loved him. And Zook still remained. And finally, in this better, happier world, Doris Toothaker never came to be. Instead, the human fisherman named Cole Skinner remained in his little village of Bluestone with his wife Vanessa that never got sick. His frail son still maintained his numerous birth defects despite the Sunlight Church's better methods. But this time, his son had a father that taught him never to be ashamed of the way he is, and to find ways to help others in the world who struggled as he did. Together, Cole's family attended Jane's wedding, and the two families lived a happy, humble life together. But this happier, wonderful timeline was not the one we lived in. You see, the fate card in the deck of many things comes with a terrible cost. When a mortal uses it to rewrite reality, it falls upon the gods, especially the elder god that rules all others, the god of fate in this case, to begin rewriting the entire universe and its history, working with all the other gods to craft a new universe with these changes the mortal requested. Even for gods, the creation of a new universe is no small task. For the next 20 years, the gods would continue to maintain and keep an eye on the world that we knew, as they prepared to abandon it. Gods cannot create more gods, at least not true ones, no matter how much they empower a mortal. The creation of new gods, be they previously mortals or new entities altogether, comes down to the single entity above even the gods themselves, the first one. But alas, as the first one decides, when the fate card is used to create a new version of the world, no new gods are created to populate that universe, or remain to tend to the old one. So the world that we know will, in the next 20 years, be abandoned by the gods forever, left to fend for themselves. But thankfully, as a small mercy, that allows the elder god of fate, Olmir, to lift the restrictions previously held on his former gods, and enable them to assist or support this old world in any way they please, to leave it in the best condition they could, before it would one day be left to fend for itself. So Notarius lent a helping hand to his favourite mortal, and together he and Vulcan got to work on fixing all the damage they could in the time they both had left. So back in the world where the Fate card doesn't take effect, Nadar activates the legendary Fate card, and it doesn't work. She tears right through Nadar, and sends her Dragonborn crumpling lifelessly to the street below. The Nightingale, having officially TPK'd the party, takes a moment to gloat in his success, before turning his attention back towards the rest of the surviving army. Before him, he sees so many squishy targets just waiting to be popped. Cyrus Greenhill and his crumbling army. The Tooth-Takers that are still fighting to protect the body of their former boss. And the undead Hudali horde, watched over by the Gravelord, the Doppelganger, and Zook. But she suddenly notices there's another target, waiting right behind him. And so she turns around with a gleefully murderous look as he lays his eyes upon Vulcan. The Nightingale lunges at lightning speed, only to find himself stopped in his tracks, as though he was nothing more than a fly hitting a castle. But as Vulcan calmly holds back the tabaxi, he simply looks upon She with pity, promising him that he will be free of Alicia's clutches shortly. Then, with a gentle strike to the head, Vulcan crumples the Nightingale with the full power of the God of Death herself. Stepping past the foiled Nightingale, Vulcan simply flicks his wrist and casually forces the undead army out of his way as he approaches the Gravelord. The Tooth-Takers took the hint, and quickly parted ways for the old turtle as well. And then Vulcan looked upon the Gravelord, unimpressed. The devil, unable to hide its fear, commanded its possessed henchmen beside him to attack. The Doppelganger did so without question, its will bound to the Gravelord. Yet the creature, predictably, did not have a chance. What surprised the Gravelord most, however, was Zook's ability to resist the possession. And the psychopathic gnome just smirked at the Gravelord in defiance, as Vulcan easily eliminated the devil and took his place, standing before Zook. With a deep look of hatred in his eye towards the gnome, Vulcan cut Zook off before he could attempt to make a snarky comment. Holding Zook by the throat, Vulcan practically spat at the gnome, as he declared him nothing more than a parasite that the world can't be rid of soon enough. Zook learns that there's a reason he always seems to come back one way or another every time that he gets killed. The elder god of fate, Olmir, had already written it into the timeline long ago. For whatever reason, fate itself protects Zook from damnation. It is one of Vulcan's greatest regrets that he will not live to see Zook finally meet his end long into the future after the gods have left this world, and in so doing, taken fate with them. Vulcan informs the little punk that the gods have left a prophecy that dictates a new group of adventurers will one day be assembled by the combined efforts of Carrick, She, Doris, and Doris's son of all people. Vulcan promises Zook that this new group of adventurers will finally vanquish him from this world when no one else ever could. Then, sick of holding the monster, Vulcan banishes Zulk into an astral prison without another word, where the psychopath will stay and rot until the day this new group finally find one another and begin their mission to destroy him once and for all. And what followed from there was the beginning of Vulcan's efforts to clean up this fractured world as best he could, and he couldn't do it alone. She woke up in an astral pocket dimension with Vulcan, once again in control of himself, as Vulcan assured him he was beyond Vilicia's reach for the time being. Vulcan apologized for the misdirection that he had been required to give them all. He had never needed them to actually kill Doris Toothaker. He simply needed them to try, with the protection of the time loop to keep them from any real harm. This meant that Nadar would be pressured into drawing the fate card from the deck of many things, and thus be able to use it later, at the right moment, in the exact same place he first drew the fate card to begin with. All along, since Nadar first arrived at Wolen with his companions, fate spun them along as Ulmir the Elder God foretold, until the Dragonborn rewrote reality, and initiated the creation of the new universe for the gods to depart to. With that explanation out of the way, Vulcan offered She the chance to train with him as a new monk of the monastery and learn to resist the influence of Valicia, while still maintaining all the power that she poured into him. Unsurprisingly, She enthusiastically agrees. Then, in the time that followed, with a great deal of assistance from Notarius and the alteration of time, they began bringing back everyone they had lost on their journey. They began by bringing back Carrick, and together, Carrick and She only grew closer as friends, as they worked on fixing the timeline, dispatched by Vulcan and Notarius to clean up all the mess that had been made. While they left the Gravelord and Eucelius to rot where they belonged, they brought back Nadar, Tywin, Squilliam, Nadine, Ickle, Palin, Dane, Rebecca Tuttle, Ryuzaki, Wilson, Kane. And of course, after the peace they had made with one another, they even brought back Doris. And so, in the following years before the gods would one day depart from this universe forever and leave it fateless, everyone allowed themselves to enjoy their lives now that the danger had passed, and the adventure was over. Dane took advantage of their access to the timeline and returned to Dale in the days before the doppelgangers tracked down and killed the original Kate. While she wasn't an exact replica of the act the doppelganger was putting on, for a time Dane and Kate still managed to find happiness together. In time, Dane took both Kate and Kane the kobold and returned to his home in the northern continent of Seren, back to the dwarven capital city of Goldstone. And years later, the rest of the party would be thrilled to hear Dane was announced as the new dwarven king, taking his father's place on the throne with Queen Kate by his side. While a kobold's lifespan isn't long, Kane enjoyed all the free food and toys that he could ever ask for, in an underground dwarven city where the cursed sun was nowhere to be seen. Kane passed away after the happiest life a kobold could live, during his sleep on Dane's lap, after free dinners at the royal dining table. Dane's little brother Deegan personally designed the blueprints for the crafting of Kane's statue in the Goldstone Museum. Meanwhile, Palin was quick to mooch off his friend's success and money like the loot goblin that he always was, and soon enjoyed an early retirement in a warm, beautiful villa, a gift from King Dane himself, as he happily grew fat and surrounded himself with quite a variety of paid company. Meanwhile, She did in fact begin his training at the monastery, with Vulcan there to guide both She and Carrick along in preparation for the day that Vulcan would no longer have his old friend Notarius, the god of time, to prolong his ancient lifespan. Carrick would eventually have to succeed Vulcan as the Grand Monk of the monastery when his mentor's time finally came. She would serve as his right-hand man, as Carrick ensured the preservation of peace at any cost continued to be upheld. Carrick was evidently dreading the day he would lose his mentor, but the welcome addition of Squilliam signing up to join the monastery when he was old enough helped lift everyone's spirits considerably. Nadine and her new boyfriend's relationship may not have worked out, but at least she was able to give Nadar and Tywin a ride back home to the Isle of Dragons. There Nadar learned to tolerate Tywin's antics, as did all the other dragons on the island, and from time to time Nadar would fly out to visit old friends across the continents and remember the glory days of saving the world that most people would never even know about. Golkak would indeed go on to succeed the Master Smith, Eldrin Stonehammer himself, and eventually be the first person to slowly convince the hardy population of Bristol to entertain the idea of magic through his excellent use of magically enchanted tools, such as runestones, to reduce the damage to the pickaxes that the workers used in the mines. Ickle would go on to have the best day of his life, when a few of his dear friends in the party secretly threw his name into the ring for a new Archmage of the Magical Emporium, after Rebecca Tuttle eventually announced that she would be stepping down. For the next 4 years following the events of what had happened, Doris Toothtaker would continue to rule the city of Dale, with a fairness and respect for its people, poor and rich alike, that no one alive had ever seen from Dale before. Yet without corrupt officials to take down for the sake of the oppressed citizens, and the increased political pressures caused by the bulk of the Centaur population still stationed down in the southeastern continent of Elion, demanding the returned city of their native homeland be given back to Centaur control, Doris no longer felt that his heart was in it. Having worked hard to gradually restore the damaged relationship with his sister, the two finally returned to being on regular speaking terms, when the day came that Jane Skinner reported to Doris that she had discovered Doris's son, now a teenager, living on the streets of Labrie for the last 4 years, after Doris's wife had died back in Bluestone. So Doris Toothtaker gave up rulership of Dale, handing it over to Elliot the Centaur, the only decent centaur that Doris had claimed ever to meet, and officially disbanded the Toothtakers, once and for all. He released the sharkened forms of all his men, and overnight, there wasn't a shark left in Dale. Doris left for Labrie right away to find his son, and begin restoring yet another one of his damaged relationships of his own doing. And so with that, the story of the original Wollen Rise of the Toothaker campaign has now been retold. Our story ends with all of our beloved characters going on to live their lives and treasure the memories of this story. Or at least, most of our characters. As all these events continue to play out in the following years, Zook remains locked away, trapped endlessly in the void of Lostwick's astral prison. And with each year that passes for the trapped gnome, he is only fueled with more and more rage at his fate. And despite what Vulcan told him, Zook swears the day will come when the gods will abandon this world and their so-called prophecy, and he will find the chance to free himself from this prison. And then, when he is unleashed upon the world with no more gods to stop him, then he will become the next one.